and welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I'm your host, Priscilla Peters.
I'm your other host, Scott Dismuke. Priscilla, it's spring. It's the first day of May when we're recording this. Everything going well. Weather good. Everything good in Little Rock.
Everything's good. Listen, we've had, let's see, lots of news going on in our world. Some of us, you and I together. The last time we were on, remember we talked about, I think that day Calipari was on the tarmac ready to come to Fayetteville. We now have a basketball team. So that's good. So we're excited about that. You know, I don't know if you heard, Scott, but Taylor Swift released a new album. I know you're very interested in that.
Listen, I stayed up, and when the clock hit midnight, I was just downloading the crap out of that. No, I was not downloading.
I always go back to she's big trucking now because she gave those drivers the $100,000 bonus. Like, I always go back to that. She'll always have a little place in my heart.
She clearly showed she was very generous, and with the amount of money that she's making, she should be. But no, I have not listened to her new album. I will leave that for others to do, and that's great. If you're a Swiftie, then go for it. I'm not necessarily a Swiftie, but I don't condemn those that are. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, I kind of am. I'm not going to lie, but I do have a 13-year-old that keeps it top of mind for me. So
well, and I'm great with that. I mean, the 13-year-olds, those are the ones that should be the hardcore Swifties.
Yeah. I
am saying in June, I'm going to Atlanta to see Justin Timberlake.
Oh, listen, I've seen him live.
I saw him once. Yep.
I love him. Let me tell you, the very first time.
That's my birthday present.
Is it really?
Well,
I can't wait to hear about it.
It just happens to be on my birthday. That is not what I asked for my birthday.
Oh, okay.
It just happens to be on my birthday.
I can't wait to hear about it. Well, I listened to this when I first saw him. It was his first big solo album when I saw him in concert. So this was years ago. I was brunette then. Okay. And, but guess who opened for him? And we had no idea who they were.
Who's that?
The Black Eyed Peas.
No way.
Yes. So it was Black Eyed Peas and then Christina Aguilera. We knew who she was, but she opened for him and then it was him. And the Black Eyed Peas, and I just remember thinking, I don't know who these people are, but I'm here for it. Like, I loved them. And then they became, who they are. So it was interesting.
We saw him on the 2020 Experience Tour. So that's the one we saw him on. So, yeah, we're going down there with some friends. We're taking our son. He's going to go. And my wife didn't want to take him the first time because she was still, saying young ears. We don't know what he's going to hear. And like I said, I'd been a 14, 15-year-old boy. I knew he had already heard more than she wanted him to hear. But so we're taking him this time.
Yeah. Oh, y'all have a blast. Okay. So our last episode, we had Lance Britton on and he talked about AI and it was very interesting. We've gotten some great feedback on that. And today you got us a really great guest.
Yeah. So we've been fortunate enough over the last several years to do some work with Schneider National. And actually I was up there last week for some meetings and had talked to their executive vice president and chief administrative officer, Rob Reich, who we've known very well and have worked with, and just said, hey, why don't you, would you mind joining us on the podcast? So why don't we bring him in here and let folks get to know Rob and hear some of his insight on some stuff. What do you say?
Sounds good.
All right. So Priscilla, I'm really, really excited about our guest today. This is somebody that we've worked with for several years at PDA, and I talked to him back in January about joining us, and so I've really been looking forward to this. But our guest today is currently serving as the Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer at Schneider National. He brings an extensive experience in the transportation industry and from several key leadership positions across maintenance, human resources, driver development, training, safety, among other areas with Schneider. Before joining Schneider, he was dedicated time as a U.S. Army officer serving as a platoon leader and company executive officer at Fort Hood, Texas. So he has served our country and now serves our country by serving at one of the great trucking and logistic companies in the nation. And we want to welcome to the resource, Rob Reich. Rob, Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Scott. Great to be here.
Yes, we're excited, Rob. We're super excited. We've been, just so you know, we've been talking about having you on for a while. We're like, could we get Rob on? I think we could. So,
well, I'm happy to be here then.
Yeah. So, Rob, we always start our interviews with 5 serious questions that seriously don't matter. And so these are just some fun questions that we want to ask so folks get to know you maybe a little bit better. So, Rob, are you ready to tackle our first 5?
I am ready for the first 5, Scott.
Okay, so let's do it. The very first question, in your opinion, what is the best sandwich?
Oh, the best sandwich? Well, that probably changes in my mind once in a while. Right now, the best sandwich is the number 13 at Jersey Mike's Way, which is a good Italian sub. I'm a little bit addicted to that right now, so that would be on the top of my sandwich list.
dude, listen, Rob, that is I can't believe no one's ever said this before, Scott. Like the number 13 at Jersey Mike's is legit. I had never thought of it that way, but it legit might be the best sandwich. That is so true.
That is a great sandwich.
Yes, the oil and I don't know what all it is, but when it all comes together, it's so good.
We have a couple different buildings here at Schneider, and I work in both of them. And so I always like it if I have to drive from one building to the other around lunchtime, because Jersey Mike's is very close to the second building. So you know where I eat on days that I got to drive between buildings.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so number 2 of the first 5 is, what is your favorite movie?
Oh, my favorite movie is Avengers Endgame. I'm a huge Marvel fan. I've been reading Marvel comics since I was 11 years old. And the Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame movies are just cinematic perfection for me. So that would be my favorite.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about that when you were here in January. My son is a huge Marvel fan as well, and I have to admit, the Endgame movie when he says I am Iron Man and snaps his fingers, that is fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
That is a great movie. I love that movie.
Awesome. So, third question. This one's interesting. We've had all kinds of answers on this one. What is the most used app on your phone?
The most used app on my phone would be, and I'm going to call it Twitter, because in my mind, it's still Twitter, not X. And that's because it is a great place for sports, actually. And so I'm a big football fan and I'm a big hockey fan. And so I follow all my favorite writers for my teams. Right now, New York Rangers just swept the first round of the playoffs over the Capitals. So I'm quite excited.
Yep.
I'm on that thing all the time, especially watching games. The writers keep you better updated than the TV people do. So to me, Twitter is a great sports app, actually.
I am right there with you. And the other beautiful thing about Twitter is you can actually mute people or mute topics that you don't want to hear or talk about. And that's the best thing about it. So I'm right there with you. I follow. So our Predators actually pulled one out last night. I know when you were here, we went to a Preds game.
Yeah.
We blew one the other night, had a 3-1 lead with less than.
Oh, Scott, I watched that. That was terrible.
It was awful. And so we actually pulled one out last night, probably that we shouldn't have won. So I guess maybe we're a little even. So yeah, I love Twitter. I'm with you. I don't call it X. I call it Twitter. It will always be Twitter. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
I don't know of anyone that actually calls it X anymore. Like
nobody but Elon.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, number 4. So the number 4 of the first 5 is, what is a talent you have that only those close to you know about?
Oh, that's a tough one, Priscilla, because, well, I can do big math in my head.
Okay.
So I do occasionally drive our finance people nuts if I pull one out in a meeting when they're struggling with some numbers. But yeah, I've always been able to do that since I was a kid. So I can do some fairly complicated math in my head.
That's impressive.
Please don't ask me to, though. I don't want to be tested.
Yeah,
hey, listen,
let's test it out real quick. No,
I'm so bad at math. If you said it with enough conviction, I would believe you. So we're all good there. We're all good there.
I'll tell you why, though. I went to a wonderful grade school in Lawton, Oklahoma, Crosby Park Elementary. And it was just a great learning environment. And all of us there were way ahead in math. So I give my old grade school credit for that particular talent.
Nice. Very nice. So the final question here, Rob, is if you weren't doing what you're doing today, obviously at Schneider, what would you be doing or hope to be doing?
Yeah, Scott, I don't know, actually. It's been a great career. I've been here 31 years. You mentioned I was in the Army, got out of the Army. My father was in the Army. I had no idea what a career might look like and found just a wonderful place to work. So I don't know. I really don't think about it. I've been so pleased and had such a great career. I don't think about the what ifs. When I was much younger, I thought, I love sports. So is there something sports involved? That type of thing. But hard to peg. I'm not sure where that would have gone. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it.
So it's trucking or nothing, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, once you get sucked in, you can't get out.
It's been a lifetime.
Yes. Scott, I feel like Rob could be like an honorary host. He loves sports.
Oh, absolutely.
He's been in trucking for years. Like, I feel like he would just fit right in here as a host with us.
Yeah, it's a little dangerous. We have to kind of lasso ourselves sometimes because we start this talking about sports and then we realize people aren't tuning in to listen to sports.
That's
right?
not what the podcast. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you have officially completed the first 5. And so I guess now we can get into probably what folks are really tuning in to hear. And that's your take on several issues. So why don't we hop into it? So first question I have, kind of a loaded question, and I think it's one that's on a lot of folks' minds that are in trucking right now. So it's clearly been a very tumultuous few years economically in trucking. So we had the COVID freight boom, and now that's followed up by an extended freight recession, or maybe even a rate recession, if you would rather call it a rate recession. And that kind of stubbornly seems to be hanging on. So kind of, in your view of the current economic cycle, where do you think we are in terms of maybe getting out of this?
I like your word stubborn that you use there, Scott, because I think that's a really appropriate term for what we're seeing. We've spent a lot of time looking at, trucking is cyclical, right? If we've been in the industry long enough, we all know that you get these peaks and valleys. And we've spent a lot of time looking at, history can inform you of what might happen, right? It's good to study history. And if you look at the typical, how long is a peak and how long are these freight recession valleys, you would absolutely argue that we are on the far end of any historical number of months that freight would be in recession and we'd be experiencing, as you said, the rate recession that we're all experiencing. So that should suggest that we should be getting out of this relatively soon if you just looked at history. That's why your word stubborn, though, is so important, is that hasn't necessarily been what people have been feeling here in the first quarter of the year. In fact, you look at many of the large public carriers have released their results in the last week or so. And I think everybody continues to speak to this is still what we're experiencing right now, is that particular recession. But, if you look at those reports and a lot of the industry analysis, you do tend to hear about a second half that starts to get better. And so I think we can all, line up with some type of improvement in the second half. The question is obviously to what extent, and I don't think anybody's crystal ball's been real clear there. What I think has been of particular interest in this particular recession is the fact that capacity has not exited the market to the extent that it has in previous recessions. Again, we go back and look at that history. Usually once you got past about those 12 months of a downturn, you'd start to see trucks come out of the industry and drivers come out of the industry. And we just haven't seen that to anywhere near that extent this time. Starting to see just a little bit of that here in the quarter. And I think part of that is because of that peak that you talked about. That COVID peak was so high, much higher than previous peaks, that I think a lot of companies, particularly smaller companies, probably had more money and had more capability to weather the storm and thus are still here. So I think that capacity question is such an interesting one because there needs to be more freight too. And again, with economic cycles, you typically see that, but we still have an overcapacity issue and not behaving routinely. And so, given that, that makes it even harder to predict than when we might see more of this positive here in the future.
Yeah. I saw a graph yesterday, and I can't remember. I think I saw it on LinkedIn, and it was showing kind of the supply and demand side, the capacity versus the freight. And what was really interesting to me is that the freight side of that, if you look at the freight volumes, it was actually not all that awful. It was probably even higher than what it was pre-COVID, which I know everything has changed now that we're post-COVID. So what is normal anymore at this point? But so I guess do you think that we're dealing with more of a capacity issue than a freight issue, or is it just kind of a bad combination of the two?
I do think it's a combination. You look at the GDP data and even consumer confidence data, and you do see that while the macroeconomics aren't bad, all of us as consumers are shifting a little bit more of our spending to the services and experience side. Many of the things, of course, that we couldn't do 2 years ago. And then perhaps a little bit less on the goods side, the stuff that's going to go in the back of all of our trailers. You also had the effect of while we were at home, many large goods were purchased. So I don't know about you guys, but I got new lawn furniture because I was going to sit out back, right? And so a lot of the thing, we probably all got that very close together. And so some of those larger purchases may not be as prevalent. You got to look at housing starts because that really, generates a lot of freight. So you're right, Scott. Some of those data says, well, freight, it doesn't look that bad, but by no means is it robust. We've absolutely seen better periods. And then you add that capacity factor to that, and you get, that equation. I read some of the Wall Street analyst reports. Schneider's public, of course, so we're attentive to what those guys will say. And Ravi Shankar is a analyst at Morgan Stanley, and he wrote up a thing today saying that absolutely, you got to get capacity right, but that freight demand usually is the trigger that really makes things better. He's probably right? But it is a both. It is absolutely a both. And so I think that would be my answer then is you got to see some of both to really get us back. Let's get the industry back on track.
Yeah. And speaking of the COVID freight boom and all the patio furniture, to your point, that we all purchased, we've seen in the PDA data that many of the drivers that entered the industry during that freight boom, they have been more apt to leave during this current freight recession because, they came in when the getting was good, right? And so have you seen that impact at Schneider? And what would your advice be to those who are trying to retain drivers right now?
Yeah, good question, Priscilla. That's interesting data. I would say we haven't seen it in a significant way. I think, a lot of changes in the owner operator market because we had, I think the whole industry saw this, right? A lot of people in that late 2021, early 22 chased those high spot rates. And so you definitely had some portion of drivers go out on their own or become an owner operator. So we definitely saw that, and that's lessened off, of course, as rates came back down. But I would say from an overall retention, we haven't seen a dramatic change in turnover as things go up and down. But clearly, you're right, Priscilla. If you joined right at the beginning of that peak, it sure feels a heck of a lot different. And that is a challenge to help somebody through that. I would argue even for non-driving associates, some of our other associates at Schneider, they came in when there were so many loads it was ridiculous every day. And so you get used to that, right? Well, now you got to be looking for loads. So we've had to change the way we talk internally as well about, hey, how do you spend your day and what do you need to do? So I think everybody's gone through that to some extent. But from a retention standpoint, I think as always, it's, some of the fundamentals you really have to stress of what's that employment value proposition that you have to offer to the driver as we've worked together. We absolutely see that in the driver feedback, of course. And I think, we know there's more pressure to get home more often from drivers than there used to be, for sure. We've grown dedicated quite a bit at Schneider. That's a big strategic growth initiative of ours. for a variety of reasons, but one of them is absolutely to improve that driver experience, more routine work schedule, get that driver home more often. We absolutely see the benefit of that. Obviously, pay is always important, and it's a bit of a challenge when you're not as productive. And so we're spending a lot of time ensuring that even in the environment that we're in, how can we ensure that we stay productive so that our processes are good? We don't want to waste our drivers' time. What are all those things that we can do, even in a challenging freight environment, to ensure that our drivers can be productive? So we're making some changes, for example, in our van truckload network of how we dispatch our company drivers to ensure that they can be more productive. And so I think it's those type of things, right, that you really got to be focused on is what can you do to support the driver, knowing that the environment is very different. So it's a little more difficult. You got to put a little more time against it. And of course, as always, and we take pride at Schneider in being a great place to work. And we want to make sure people are treated appropriately and that, we call everyone associate here because we're all part of the company and we're all in this together. And we want to make sure that our drivers, and technicians, and everybody that works here feels that way. And I think that's always an important check for any organization, when you're considering what your retention looks like and what your just reputation, even for recruiting, looks like is, what type of conversations do you have at work and are they positive? And people should feel good about being here. Even if, say, I'm okay. I hate to see when a driver leaves, but occasionally they just found this wonderful time at home job and I get it. We didn't have that same opportunity in a geography. So I'm disappointed they left. But if the feedback is, hey, Schneider was a great place to work, well, good. That we can work on, right? Because that I feel good about that problem. Because let's find some more better time at home freight. I would hate to hear, well, I left because I wasn't treated well and it just wasn't a good environment. That's what we want to make sure we never hear.
Good stuff. And just from our experience working together, I can tell you guys do treat your drivers extremely well. And
well, thank you, Scott.
Do a great job with your drivers. So this is actually a question I've been excited to hear your response to. So Schneider is on the forefront of deploying electric trucks, and know you do a lot of work in that area. So back in November, you guys announced you were the first major carrier to achieve 1 million zero emission miles. Maybe tell us a little bit about the electric truck fleet that you guys have, how the drivers feel about them, and kind of the benefits and challenges of the electric trucks.
Yeah, happy to do so, Scott. We're really proud of what we've done with battery electric vehicles so far. We think we're the leader in the industry. So we've got 94 battery electric vehicles that we're operating out in Southern California. 2 of them are yard trucks, but 92 are eCascadia day cabs that are predominantly operating in our intermodal fleet in Southern California. So it was a multi-year project, really. We decided, we knew this was part of the future, both through regulatory direction. We know California has some rules and regulations that people are going to have to comply with, as well as just from an overall sustainability standpoint. We thought it was important to get some experience in the battery electric space. But, for many of us in the industry, it's easy to test 2 trucks, right? 2 trucks of new technology, because you can make 2 trucks work just about doing anything, right? You put them somewhere special, you take good care of them. We wanted to do more than that on the battery electric side. So we said, well, hey, what if we electrified 1 operation in total? That will really tell you whether you can make this happen and make this work. At the same time as we were contemplating that, California had some funding initiatives that helped pay for this, and they were looking for the same thing. They were looking for a larger operation that would go electric, again, for the same reason, right? Will this work? What are the lessons learned, et cetera? So we went through a big planning process. We applied for some grants, which we achieved. The largest was called the Joint Electric Truck Scaling Initiative that California sponsored. And that helped us pay for 50 battery electric vehicles, as well as the charging infrastructure on site. So all of our charging is at our South El Monte intermodal facility. Took a couple years to put all that together. So it's, people probably heard it's challenging working with utilities. You need a lot of power there locally. It just takes a while from a permitting and construction standpoint. But as you said, we did cut the ribbon on the facility middle of last year and started running those 92 battery electric vehicles and have been pleased with our experience so far. There's always challenges with new technology, especially when you get the first of a new batch. So a few technical challenges here and there with the trucks and the chargers, but we're pretty pleased with how those are operating. In particular, Scott, you asked about how our drivers feel about it, very, very positive. So I don't know if anybody out there, if you guys or anybody else drives an electric car, very similar experience. And, our trucks these days are pretty nice trucks. Think about when I started in the industry. That's a very different truck today than it was 30 years ago already, the diesel side. But these electric vehicles, they're totally quiet. So there's just no noise whatsoever. We all get used to it, but there's a little bit of a diesel smell to a truck, right? Even a newer truck. None of that with a battery electric vehicle. And they just handle extremely well. So at our El Monte facility, for example, when you turn out of the facility, you can get out with a loaded trailer. It's about 2 seconds faster, just even exiting the gate with the BEV than it is with diesel, because the acceleration, the torque on the wheels, again, it very much handles like a car to some extent. So our driver feedback has been great. Not as tired at the end of the day. Love the lack of noise. Love the handling. You're going to get up to speed a little faster with those vehicles. And so, yeah, I would say, Scott, even more so than we anticipated, the driver feedback has been great. And what's neat there is they have an impact on the range of the truck. So the typical range of the trucks that we're running right now is about 220 miles. But as the drivers learn the regenerative braking, so you can drive these with just one pedal. And as they learn that regenerative braking, you're actually putting juice back into the battery while you're driving in some circumstances. You're actually extending then the range of the truck. And so when some drivers initially were, a little worried. Now we're doing intermodal freight there in Southern California. That's these fit there very well because the length of haul isn't that long.
Right.
But if you're ever worried a little bit about that, everybody's learned, as I learn how to drive this, I'm going to get more range than I anticipated anyway. So that's been a positive as well. So yeah, feel really good about it from the driver perspective.
That's great. So do you think we ever get to a place where we can do, obviously there's an infrastructure issue to do long haul. So that's really clear. So, but do you think we ever get to a point, because obviously the federal government would have to be involved, and that's a different podcast for a different day.
Yes, it is.
But do you ever think we get to a point that we can use it for long haul, that we can use it for that kind of beyond the local 225 mile range? I think you said. Do you think we can get to that point?
I think you'll see the range extended over time, Scott, as battery technology improves. I don't think battery electric is going to be the longer haul solution, because even as the chemistry of the batteries improve, you do have a weight trade-off. So to get more range, you need more batteries, even as they advance. And so I think you're going to see this. I think it's a good fit in day cabs for sure. And day cabs are a significant part of the industry fleet. So I could see that working really well. I think maybe your medium length of haul, dedicated type operation where you can create a charging infrastructure that you can rely on. Maybe it's return to base in one other spot at a customer, that type of thing. I think you'll see battery electric successful there. I'm not sure it goes beyond that, just given the technical challenges and the weight trade-off that you have to have.
Yeah.
Now, saying all that, it's still very expensive. And so we're in the early stages of this where we benefited from government funding to allow us to do this in a financially responsible manner. Long term, that you can't keep doing it that way, right? You have to see some of the costs come down. But, you look at most technology, not all technology, but most technology over time, we do see cost reduction as technology improves. Think of the TVs we have on our wall today versus even what we had 10 years ago. Not quite the same thing, but you do see that in technology. So we're going to need to see that here to get the cost of these vehicles, more in line with what we're used to. And we're not there yet. And we'll see how long that takes to get there.
Well, so speaking of technology, you guys have also done a lot of testing and research on self-driving trucks. Kind of tell us maybe what you guys are learning about self-driving trucks. What's the future there? And, how close are we maybe to that being more of a reality than a bunch of testing, right?
Sure. Great question. Well, our philosophy on this, Scott, is it's interesting technology. We think it's important to be involved in new technology testing that could be something that changes part of the industry. And so that's why we wanted to be involved early on, is really for us to be able to understand it and understand how this might affect the future of freight and the future of our organization. So to your point, for a couple of years, we've been working with a couple of the autonomous vehicle developers to understand that better. I've had a chance to ride in them multiple times now. Now, there's still always a safety driver still, so there aren't trucks running yet without a human in, but the safety driver is not interacting with the truck. He's there, hands close to the wheel, foot where he needs it. But once we get on the highway, the truck is driven. I've, done 60-mile, get off the highway, turn around, go the other way, get back in the yard without the safety driver having to interact. So it's not ready for prime time quite yet, obviously. But it's very impressive. It is very impressive. And I tell you, my walk away thinking really long term, Scott. So I'll start really long term is because you'll see this in cars too. I bet my grandchildren, I don't have any yet. My kids are too young. I'm not sure my grandchildren will ever drive. So, if you go out and or maybe their kids, I don't know how far, maybe 30 years from now, I think one day people are going to look back at us and those knuckleheads used to drive vehicles themselves and run into each other. So I believe if you start with that far future and say, hey, this technology one day will transform mobility. I believe that. I don't know if I'll be around for it, but I believe that. Well, if you start coming back from that, then you got to start thinking, well, at some point, then some of it has to be in place. And I think that's where on the truck side, we're starting to see, I've seen it in action. So I'm a believer in, hey, it looks like this technology is going to get there. Now, that question, the question becomes, well, how will it be deployed? And my belief, and I think from a driver's standpoint, I don't think this is the threat that perhaps some people see it as for driving jobs. I think the most easy solution that these autonomous vehicles could handle is on highway because you have fewer variables, right? So I could see some on highway autonomous lanes. But what are you going to need on either end? You're going to need drivers, human drivers in their truck that pick up the freight and bring it to a transfer point or however the process might work that gets that trailer to that autonomous truck that then, likely drives overnight when there's not a lot of people on the road, gets to another transfer point, human driver picks it up and delivers it. Feels a little like intermodal to me to some extent, right, on certain lanes. And so I think we could see a future of this may create a lot of, we'll call them local dray jobs that are attached to these type of lanes. So I think it could be a positive actually from creating the type of job that many drivers are looking for. But at the same time, I think there's a future where we're going to see this. The when question is the great debate, Scott. And I think there's a lot of different answers out there about what that when might look like. And I don't have a good answer. I think it could be closer than some people think, just given the technology that I've seen. Every time it's a little better. And so you walk away from that thinking, well, yeah. I just took a ride in an autonomous truck and it did all the driving. So at some point, I think it'll happen. But yeah, we'll see how quickly that's enabled. A lot of factors here. You have the technology. Obviously, you'll have some cost factors here as well with new technology. But here, clearly, there's just societal and regulatory rules that are going to have an impact. And that's still, there's some of that still has to be worked out.
Yeah. And I was in Phoenix last week at a conference, an ATA conference. And when I tell you, I probably saw 5 cars with no one in them. That is it Mayo, the Uber with the self-driving Uber cars. I mean, I saw them everywhere. Every time I left the hotel for something or, was going to dinner or whatever, I would see them just driving. It is the weirdest thing to see a car driving down the street that has no driver in it. It's a little eerie, a little, but very interesting, very, very interesting. So we'll be.
So I got to tell you a story about those taxis. So I was in Arizona and I took one of those taxis. So we were at a coffee shop and you use an app, and the car comes to you, of course. So we're just in like a strip mall coffee shop. The van pulls up. There's no one in it. The door opens. You get in. There's a video screen. It tells you, please buckle your seatbelt. And then and asks you, are you ready to go? So you got to hit a button that you're ready to go. But it looks like a normal van. There's plexiglass, so you can't get in the front seat. But there's 2 seats and a steering wheel. And again, looks like a normal van. And off we went. And I tell you what I was most impressed with was even just navigating the parking lot of the strip mall, right? Moving around cars. We got on the street. We actually had to take us to a couple different places just to experience the ride. Within a minute or two, you feel like, hey, this thing knows what it's doing.
Yeah.
We were on a bigger street. We were on side streets. What I was most impressed with, and this wasn't a setup by the provider or anything, but we were going through an intersection, and all of a sudden, here comes a pickup truck that's going to hit us.
Oh, my word.
No kidding. And I'm not sure if I was driving, I would have reacted fast enough to avoid it.
Oh, wow.
But the van did. The only thing it didn't do is beep its horn and make an obscene gesture at the pickup truck.
We're looking at you, Scott, on that. We're looking at Scott.
Yeah. I was super impressed. And again, if you can do that, that tells you, where this is going, right? That's why I feel like hard to know when the trucks will be out there, but it's coming. It's
very interesting. Okay, so Rob, we have one final question for you. Again, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great. So selfishly, I have a recruiting question for you. So more and more, we're competing against other industries for talent, right? Construction industry, warehousing, the oil industry, especially driver talent, but honestly, like to your point earlier, associates of all kinds, right? Like all talent types. So as those needs for talent increase, what are your thoughts on how we can do better as an industry? How can trucking do better to really find quality, not just driver talent, but, I guess talent in general?
Yeah, it's a great question, Priscilla. I do think, look at all the infrastructure development that's going to happen in the country in the next 10 years. That's going to be challenging for us and for others as well. I think it starts with understanding what those other roles are and what the offers are and what the value proposition of those jobs. Why would somebody be attracted to that? And I think you got to be honest with yourself then and say, well, how do I compete with that value proposition? Again, the fundamentals are going to be really important around home time and pay and experience, just the experience of the work. And I think you got to start there with those fundamentals. But I think then you also have to ask, okay, what do they have to offer that's unique, that might be appealing? And can we create any of that uniqueness for ourselves? And so, again, there's a lot more driver jobs, for example, that we're seeing in dedicated that work directly with a customer. There's home delivery type things, right? Well, maybe that provides that additional experience that's appealing to somebody and would be more appealing than what the other industry might have to offer. So I think we have to think about the fundamentals, because if you can't compete on the fundamentals, you really have a problem. But then we have to think about what are those unique things we're offering that are differentiators. For example, in Southern California, I'd sell electric trucks, right? That you get an electric truck experience. And so I think we have to continue to look for more and more of those opportunities to talk about why it's not just how someone might think of trucking in the past, but what trucking might look like in the future and even current state. And what are some of the more appealing characteristics of that as the nature of the job changes, as the technology in the truck changes, as the connectivity with the customer and with the company changes. I think we have to talk about that a little bit more often for people to know why you're going to have a more positive experience here than you might think, particularly if you're assessing truck driving and you don't know anybody in the industry, which we know is frequently what people are doing. I think there's some still older assumptions there that we're going to have to get past. And it's long term. Many of these other things be a good job, but it's going to be an 18-month contract on that infrastructure assignment. I think there's a longevity here and a long-term career that we can sell that perhaps some of the other options aren't going to be as successful talking about.
Well, that's great, Rob, and appreciate your insight on that, and really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us and come on here. I would love to have you back here in several months talking about the electric trucks again, because I think there's a lot to talk about, and you guys have some great insight and have done some great testing on that. So to continuing to follow that journey and what you guys are doing there, and the self-driving trucks for that matter. Would be interesting to hear some follow-up on that. But
Nope. Happy to do that, Scott.
But in the meantime, again, really appreciate your time joining us and for your insight today. And we'll have you on here again in several months and follow up on some of the things you guys are doing at Schneider.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Priscilla. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, everybody, it is that time of the show. Because we call ourselves The Resource, we want to be sure and provide you with resources, data, and information that has recently caught our eye to help you recruit smarter and retain better. Priscilla, I know you prepare for this diligently like I do every episode. What is your data point today?
Yes. So, Rob talked a little bit about this in our interview with him, just about like how freight is coming back a little. He kind of indicated mid-year-ish is what he was kind of hearing from most of the analysts and experts that he's talking to. But I will say, and typically in the recruiting world where we live and breathe, we typically start to feel it before a lot of folks, because as carriers begin to see, oh, wow, we're bidding on a lot of freight, or we're bidding on freight in some areas that maybe we hadn't, they'll begin to post jobs pretty quickly. And once they've secured those, that freight, or if they see maybe some of their shippers are saying, hey, we've got some new freight coming down the pike that we know we're going to need you to take for us. And I will tell you, the end of the first quarter, we began to see quite a significant increase in job postings for drivers. So specifically, our Fleet Intel platform, one of the things they do is they kind of basically roam the internet, if you will, for job postings, and they pull driver pay data out of that. But at the same time, they look at just the volume of jobs, and month over month. So from March to April in this calendar year that we're in 2024, competition for drivers is definitely increasing. Company driver job postings were up 39% just month over month from March to April. That's significant. That's just in 1 month, Scott. So again, it's just showing like the demand for drivers is ever so slightly beginning to intensify, but we're going to keep tabs on that number and just see because as job postings increase, we're also seeing job seekers increase. So the number of eyeballs that are getting on these CDL job postings are increasing, which inevitably means that the demand for drivers is growing, but also turnover is probably going to start upticking as well. So I just wanted to share that. I thought that was really interesting and something we recently shared that in our data download as well.
Yeah. To that point, when kind of talking about how turnover seems to go up as when they start advertising, and when we see the increase in advertising, usually there's a lot of information about compensation in those advertising. You probably can answer that better than I can, but it's hard to imagine advertising for a job where we're not talking about compensation. And I think, as I talked about last month, we've really begun to see a shift in our data as it relates to compensation. Throughout the freight recession, or whatever we want to call it, we saw a lot of data, drivers complaining about miles or lack of freight. And that has always been, frankly, since we've started collecting data, that's always been the top issue. But what we have seen is a decrease in drivers talking about freight and miles, and more talking about pay rate, and not just pay rate about what you pay, but how you pay it, how you're communicating it, but more importantly, the predictability of that pay. That really seems to kind of be the key that we're seeing with compensation issues right now, is what's the predictability of that pay. And obviously a lot of things come to mind when you're talking about predictability. It's not just the rate, but it's also about loads and miles and what they're doing consistently. And so as we were looking at our Q1 data, and really kind of the termination, why were drivers leaving in Q1? One of the things that we saw is 5 of the top 10 issues for drivers who voluntarily left their job in Q1. 5 of the top 10 issues were directly or indirectly related to compensation. So we looked at the number one issue was tractor mechanical breakdown issues. so obviously that's an equipment side of things, but as we've seen in our data, equipment issues almost always kind of cascade into a compensation problem the following week. Pay rate was number 2. Miles, inconsistent miles were number 4. Miles loads not available were number 6. And then we had drivers talking about poor scheduling and planning at number 9. So there's several issues that are at play here. And I think it just kind of really brings into context how important the compensation story is, because it's really affected by a lot of issues. Communication plays a big role in that. Not only communicating how you pay, but when you pay, and drivers understanding that. Helping drivers understand why they're being planned the way that they are, helping them understand you're putting them in a position to be successful. So if you've got them on a short load right now, it's really putting them in position to pick up a load that's going to give them 400 miles or 500 miles. And then obviously the equipment and the breakdown scenario, where if drivers are repeatedly broken down, or if they're stuck in the shop, how important it is to keep that driver running and logging miles, because we're starting to see a major pickup in compensation issues and really everything that encompasses what affects a driver's ability to make that consistent pay, but more importantly, make that predictable pay. And I think that's kind of the main point I want to get across here is drivers are looking for predictability. So a lot of the turnover that's happening right now is drivers either looking for a better, more understandable pay rate, or better, more consistent freight to kind of make what they're needing to make. So as things start to pick up for drivers from an advertising standpoint, from the retention side of things, I think the message that you're needing to tell and get across to drivers that you're hoping to bring in is what's the predictability of that pay, and what can drivers predict from a month to month basis.
Good stuff. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. All right. Well, another show in the books.
We're coming up on being able to get into season 2. So we've got to think about some celebrating there, right?
I know. Very exciting. Very exciting. Thanks for listening to The Resource. If you enjoyed this show, please give us a high five by leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button so you don't miss an episode.
And if you have any questions or feedback to share, please hit us up on social media or via email. And we'll be back on our next episode with more fun data information to help you in your recruiting and retention game. Everybody have a great day, and we will see you next month.
Bye, guys.